The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Welcome to a discussion with author Bradford Morrow. I'm Steve Benson. Bradford Morrow is the author of Trinity Fields, just published by Viking. Brad, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, this book has been called a faction. What do you mean by that? Or what do you think was meant by that question?
Well, if I understood the person who coined that word, it was basically referring to the fact that this novel melds so completely history with fiction that it becomes a sort of a new genre almost of faction. I liked the coinage myself. History in this novel is not a backdrop. I don't run a number of characters around some kind of historical backdrop, but it's actually a character, if you will. It's an interactor with the people who are in the book. So it's a work of history and fiction simultaneously.
There are many convergences in this book, aren't there?
Well, a lot of things have been, when I was working on the novel, all sorts of things that kept happening to me personally and to the characters and to the way the book was constructed. That, it really was a book of accidents, convergences, just like life is. In fact, I think part of the veracity of the book comes from the fact that when I was working on the novel, so many things interplayed with the novel itself and the construction of the novel that were feeding in out of my own life. And during the research of the book, so many things occurred that changed the course of how the book developed itself. That it's a book of convergences too.
Even the genesis of the book has an interesting story behind it.
Well, it does. Again, I didn't realize what I was doing until after the novel was finished, and with my work, often I don't even realize after I've finished a book what I've done, particularly. But in this case, I grew up in Colorado, and my father worked for the Martin Marietta Corporation, and as a boy growing up, I never really understood what he did for a living. He worked up in the Rocky Mountains, up in the foothills there, and we'd go to try to pick him up at night, and you would be meted at a gate with a guard, and you would never go past that. And I only later discovered when I was a teenager what the Martin Marietta Corporation was involved with the Titan missile, and developed a lot of ordnance delivery systems for the Vietnam conflict and so forth, which in my family meant that all hell broke loose. By taking the novel to Los Alamos rather than keeping it in Littleton, Colorado, I guess I raised the ante on myself. But it was the beginning, in a way, of beginning to tie in Vietnam with World War II that got this book going.
This book is also full of secrets, and of course Los Alamos and that secret of the Manhattan Project is one of the great secrets in American history.
Well, yeah, it was probably the last time the government managed really to keep a secret from the beginning to its successful conclusion without the media or anybody figuring out what was going on. To have all those physicists collected together on this mesa in the Jemez Mountains for almost 2 years developing the atom bomb, and to keep that away from the public, to keep it away from everyone, was a major feat of stealth and covert activity on the government's part. So, yes, the boys, Kip and Bryce, who are the two characters, or the friendship we're talking about here, whose friendship I follow over the course of almost 50 years. These two were born into the shadow of their parents' war, and born into a community that was the most closed community in the history of America, to my knowledge. Certainly during the Manhattan Project period, there was nothing like it. Letters were unsealed. People were given code names to work with. The 100 or so children who were born during the period of the Manhattan Project, on their birth certificates is listed a P.O. box in Santa Fe, New Mexico, for instance. Driver's licenses, they had code words, and Enrico Fermi, for instance, was known as Henry Farmer. It was an extraordinary moment in American history, and I think it forever changed how the government dealt with covert activities after that, since it was such a success, in quotes. I mean, it worked. They were able to even set off a nuclear device in southern New Mexico and managed to explain that away as an accidental explosion of a munitions dump. And they got away with all this. And I think after that, really, the government developed more of a role for the CIA, you know, a relatively recent invention, and for covert activities and secret behavior.
And what
abroad.
constitutes national security?
Precisely, yeah.
Let's talk about that incredible community, and it's characterized, of course, in the novel as the Hill.
Right.
And where you have these incredible scientific minds and yet living with their families almost in sort of a weird suburban environment.
Well, it was utopian in a way. I mean, they didn't have that many facilities. Los Alamos was a boys' camp back in the 30s and back into the 20s for boys from the East Coast would come out. I gather sort of sickly boys maybe, or boys in need of some good mountaineering and some discipline. William Burroughs went to Los Alamos boys' camp, for instance. When it was converted, when the government took the boys' camp over, barricades were run around the mesas. You needed a pass to get in and out of town. Once you were part of the Los Alamos community, you really, during the Manhattan Project time period, 44, 45, you were really not allowed to leave town. I mean, occasionally, if you were lucky, you could go down to Santa Fe for the day, but you weren't allowed to say a thing. People down in Santa Fe speculated about what they were doing up there. There were actual theories that maybe they were building electric spaceships. One of my favorite theories was that they were making windshield wipers for submarines, river-going submarines that would go down the Rio Grande and into the Gulf of Mexico. So you never knew that they were distilling scotch, was one of the rumors, that it was an internment camp for Republicans who got out of hand. Pregnant wax would be up there. No one really knew what was good. They knew something was up, but they didn't know exactly what. So the days were the days of Los Alamos during that period were utopian. They were sequestered from the world. It must have been an extraordinary experience. It's a place of such physical beauty that it's just takes your breath away how glorious the place actually is to visit.
And of course, people were displaced.
Oh, very much so. Their families were not allowed to visit them. They had no friends were allowed to visit them. They were totally cut off from the world. What's odd about Los Alamos, one of the many things, is that it was truly also a successful experiment in socialism. I mean, I think it was the most successful socialist community ever founded in this country. And the irony of that, you know, during the 50s must have been extraordinary to them, because here they were then going on to develop the hydrogen bomb, thermonuclear devices and so forth, to prevent the spread of socialism, to prevent socialism from taking over and communism, even though they were not subject to municipal tax themselves. They were really sort of looked after, shepherded, if you will, by the U.S. government. So it's a place fraught with ambiguities, contradictions, and secrets, subtleties, mysteries. It's an amazing place, and a place of super high intellect.
You also have been back there, and tell us about your visit to Ground Zero.
Well, Ground Zero is downstate. That's down near Alamogordo, and I visited Ground Zero in the fall of 1994. That too is a mysterious journey. Anyone is welcome there. You don't have to be a writer working on a book. It's open the first Saturday of October and the first Saturday of April every year, and you gather in Alamogordo, maybe a caravan of a couple of hundred cars. You're escorted by military police into the White Sands missile range, which is very, very top secret also. And you go across this, again, amazing landscape of scratchland, really desert, mesquite, creosote, just a few bushes here and there, some antelope, maybe you'll see some wild horses. And you go into this place where they detonated the first atom bomb. You walk the last several hundred yards, and Lord, it's something else to come up over this rise and see this 10, 15-foot obelisk, very stark, that's there, of lava stone, and with a very simple brass plaque on it that says, here is the site where the first atomic explosion occurred at, July 16th, 1945. And it's a humbling, upsetting experience. There's still a kind of concavity there, and you just sense this is a place where the world changed. Because after the atom bomb was available to us, the apocalypse was in mankind's hands, wasn't it? And things were never the same thereafter. I mean, we could completely destroy the planet. We have that capacity, and we have for 50 years. And I really think that not only has warfare changed, but the whole nature of the planet has changed. The world was changed at that moment.
Well, at that moment, America was in charge, in a sense. But now as you follow this friendship of Kip and Bryce, the world changes. America is no longer in charge. But those secrets and the power continues.
Well, in a way, the atom bomb made it impossible to wage a regular war again. I mean, the conventional war, as it was known, say World War I, any war before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was led in a very different way. I mean, you did not have the prospect of total annihilation of the planet, in view. It was not a possibility before that. Once it was, I think it really changed the way we fought in Vietnam. Korea, I know it was discussed, did we drop the bomb in Korea? The Russians got their atomic capabilities up and running by 1949 or so. So really the arms race was underway. The scientists, by the way, of Los Alamos were not necessarily blood-hungry, bloodlusty, destructive men. I mean, they were the first to be horrified by the prospect of what could happen if...
Well, J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer was, an amazing American character, amazing figure, fraught with dark sides and bright sides. But many of the scientists, I think, labored on the project in a atmosphere of heroism. I mean, they wanted to bring World War II to an end. If they had succeeded in saving American lives, that was their mission, that was their project. So at the time, in 1945, this was when the bombs were dropped. This was a heroic effort. This was something to celebrate. But very quickly thereafter, it became something altogether different. As Oppenheimer put it, the physicists of Los Alamos have known sin in its real, for its real meaning.
And these two boys, Kip and Bryce, their lives converge, but yet, of course, during the Vietnam War, they separate.
Well, I wanted to see, in a way, what would happen if you took a friendship that was almost atomically tight. I mean, these boys had each other to look to in the 50s. Los Alamos remained a closed community until the middle 50s when the gates were finally lifted. But even then, even now, it's a very closed community. I wanted to see what would happen if this atom of friendship was split, if you will, and to see the emotional fission that would occur after that. So when they come of age in the war of their generation, the Vietnam War, one of them winds up in Vietnam and the other becomes an anti-war activist. And it's really that friendship, having been so close and then sundered by the Vietnam War, that I really wanted to observe and follow.
And Kip, and his name also has a very interesting relationship to the Japanese word pika.
I didn't know that. Again, one of these accidents of fiction writing, which I just adore. I mean, as a novelist, you do have freedoms. You can have a Kip and a Bryce and come at any subject from two angles simultaneously, which is a wonderful freedom that a fiction writer can have. There are many other aspects of Kip's name that came into play.
Tell just some of them. And the word, what...
Well, for instance, Laos. I had originally intended to send Kip just to Vietnam, and through a series of extraordinary circumstances, I wound up meeting a man who directed, not only served, but actually directed our covert war out of Laos, was the head of what was known as the Ravens program in Lon Chien, Laos. And I had met him as an insurance man on a radio show. I was on some radio show. There was an expert on how to get aphids off your houseplants. There was Morrow with a novel, which the interviewer, bless her heart, I adore her, hadn't read and probably never will read. And then here is this life insurance man named Roger Daisley, and he had kept up with me, kept sending me Christmas cards and so forth, and I was well into the book. one day he called me and said, well, Brad, tell me how the new book is going. What's it about? And I told him, Kip and Bryce, born in Los Alamos, come of age. One goes to Vietnam. And he said, well, where in Vietnam? And I told him what I knew at the time. And he said, you know, maybe your man wound up in Laos. And I wrote down the word Laos because I usually do have a pencil in my hands. And I'm a little dyslexic. And I just saw it instantly that the word Laos is hidden in an anagram, in a scramble, not once, but twice inside the words Los Alamos, with the initial M, which is my last initial, left over, just in case I was wondering who this was for. And here was another Trinity for me. And so I started working on Laos, and I spent hundreds of hours talking with him. And just for instance, Kip is the name of the Laotian currency. I mean, it was just, these things just kept
And the black, we
happening.
better get back to that original Japanese word pika, too.
Oh, pika's an amazing word, too. Pika is the Japanese word for the flash that occurs specifically above Hiroshima. It was a word that was used in Hiroshima, the flash point just before the bomb actually detonates. So, and Kip spelled backwards is pick, which is a choice to choose. Gosh, there are things I've used with the name in there that I've probably forgotten now. They'll be unearthed later. But this happens. When you're on to something, I really believe there's a kind of mystical mystery element here where accidents can lead you to along a journey to things that are meant for you.
Well, and myth, and of course, Bryce's mother is heavily involved in storytelling and myth.
Well, the irony there, of course, is that she's a wonderful religious gal, a hard-drinking woman, and that Bryce believes more in the magical healing properties of the dirt down in Chimayo, which is this wonderful little church, which again is part of the counterpoint in the book, Los Alamos in Chimayo, New Mexico. But the Bryce believes more in the magic healing properties of this sacred soil down there than she does. Yes, I adore Bryce's mother.
Talk a little bit about Chimayo and the dirt eating.
Well, on Good Fridays every year in Chimayo, which is about midway between Santa Fe and Taos. I wanted to say Laos. There's Taos and Laos too. Down in Chimayo there's a little mission church built about 1818 or so. And on Good Fridays, it used to be maybe 100 penitentes or believers would walk across the desert and go down to this church. And there's a little hole in the back of the church in a little room, tiny, tiny room, that's called the Posito. And in this hole, there is dirt that is supposedly replenishing that has magic healing properties. And these people go and go back and get their tierra bendita, as it's called. And it's in the sacristy there are all kinds of crutches that are hung up by people who've had miraculous cures. Now they can walk. I met a man who says he had a brain tumor that was cured by the soil at Chimayo. This last year, it got up to 35,000 people walking across the desert to go to this place.
And you went, we're speaking in the spring of 1995.
1995. I go every year now. And I'm not a Catholic, and I don't really know. People ask me, well, why do you go do this, Brad, if you're not a believer? And I say, well, I'm just walking. I don't know. That valley has been sacred long before the Hispanic Catholics settled there. The Tewa Indians felt that there were magic properties in that soil as far back as 3,000, 4,000 years ago. So somehow, though, for the novel, the dichotomy of Chimayo, this place of magic, mystery, spirituality, religiosity, no tech, not even low tech, and the hill, as it's called, I didn't call it the hill, they call it the hill, Los Alamos, place of high intellect, high tech, and I'm not so inclined to say good and evil anymore as I used to be. It's more complex than that, but that dichotomy is what really got me going.
It also, towards the end of the novel, the wonderful imagery of the bridge and the river that speaks.
Right, the Ottawa crossing. Again, there's so many tie-ins. I'm also thinking of the Hmong who are in the Laotian scenes, and their tie-ins are the Anasazi who used to live, and the Tewa before them who used to sort of lived in a similar kind of style in New Mexico. Well, that place where the bridge crosses and where those cyclotrons and all the equipment that went into making the atom bomb and all these extraordinarily brilliant physicists who went up there, and then the 3 bombs came back down off the hill, everything crossed that bridge going back and forth. And there was an amazing woman named Edith Warner, who was from Philadelphia, who was one of the great liberated ladies of the early part of the century. Came out in the 20s and 30s just to live by herself, and she got a job at the Ottawa Crossing, helping to unload supplies that came in for the boys' school. And when the physicists came, they just attached themselves to her. She wound up living with one of the Indian elders from the San Ildefonso Pueblo, moved in with her, and they have a love story that's an amazing story. That
well, and you
ties
talk
in
about that
end.
at the end of the novel, and the fact that she literally lives in the shadow of the new bridge.
Right. Well, there have been, of course, three bridges there.
Another trinity.
Another trinity. There was a trestle bridge, and then there's the old bridge that the scientists crossed, and now there's a fancy new bridge that goes across. And Bryce, at the very end of the book, I don't think we're taking anything away from the book, goes down there to take a photograph of the bridge, and then he realizes there's really not much point in it because we're builders. We keep building. There will be another bridge. And anyway, yeah, that's where the book ends.
Bryce, let's give just a sample of some of the passages for our listeners.
Alrighty. I love it that you called me Bryce because...
Brad, yes, yeah. Bryce, Brad.
No, someone said, why does Bryce McCarthy and Bradford Morrow have the same last initials? And I said, I don't know, you tell me. Here's the opening of the book, and then maybe I'll just read a paragraph that describes at ground zero what it was like when the bomb went off. We came careening across the desert toward Chimayo. Dry, warm wind over our faces, hysterical with laughter, crazy with our sudden freedom, while over our heads an enormous sky wheeled, studded with stars, and the Milky Way shed its ghostly glow over the buttes and pinyon trees and junipers. We were 15, and we were in some kind of trouble. We were tickling the dragon's tail hot and heavy. And though our eyes were tearing from the wind that scratched them, the tears dried on our temples as fast as they flowed, and our tongues felt thick from the Scotch whiskey we'd taken from Fuller Lodge back on the mesa. It was me and Kip, and this kid we'd picked up hitching in the middle of the night, out along the stretch by San Ildefonso Pueblo, not Indian, an Hispanic named Fernando Martinez, who was probably younger than we and who kept standing up in the back seat as we accelerated across the landscape. The bottle went around from hand to hand. Words were shouted but flew away behind us into the arroyos and sagebrush. We were the most unholy trinity on the face of the earth, or else the most holy. Grim and giddy, we'd have been a sight to see if anybody had been there to see us, but the highway between Pojoaque and Chimayo was empty. We stopped once to walk into the desert a few hundred feet and throw ourselves down on our backs and look up at the stout stars and wobbly moon and howl and curse and dance and just be cool, bad outlaws. While back on the road, the radio blasted Tutti Frutti. And this Martinez began to carry on because Kip asked him what he was doing at the Pueblo if he lived over here on the high road to Taos. And the kid started bragging that he just popped his first cherry. I said, no, you didn't. And he said, did so. And Kip said, you lie like a dog, man. And he said, you lie like a rug, man. But it didn't really matter because when he asked us what we were doing out here in the night in a stolen car, good boys like us, crew cut and white as soap tree yucca petals, here in our t-shirts and blue jeans cuffed over brown shoes. When we told him what we were doing, he didn't believe us any more than we had believed him. We told him we were from up on the hill, and we were making a pilgrimage to the valley of the little church where the dirt is sacred because we were sick, and our parents were sick, and every last one of our neighbors was sick. All of us were guilty, tainted black to the pit of our souls by what had happened at our home. This is what we said. We, they, all of us needed to be cured, and the only way to be absolved of the infamy of so many murders was to go, pay homage, and partake of the magic purifying soil at Chimayo. Fernando Martinez coughed loud, spat hard, and rolled around in the arroyo laughing like somebody who didn't have the sense God gave an apple, and said, "You guys are nuts." And we said, "Are not." And he said, "You're out of your minds." And we started running like jackrabbits to the car. And Martinez was at our heels shouting, "Hey, wait for me." And though we didn't, he managed to leap in the back seat on the fly in time to stay with us all the way down into the village. And we didn't mind because nothing mattered. We were in such trouble now that nothing mattered at all except getting to the church in order to be blessed with the miraculous dirt that would sanctify our great escape and confirm our newfound manhood.
We have just a couple of minutes left, and I want to ask about some more of the convergences. There's another very important trinity that involves Jessica,
Right.
who is the lover of actually both Kip and Bryce, and their daughter Ariel. And I want to ask, just as we
Right.
close out now, about Ariel and the Shakespearean imagery that flows throughout the book.
Well, Oppenheimer's favorite play by Shakespeare was The Tempest. And of course, when I saw that once more, I thought, well, we're underway again, because The Tempest is set in an island, a place away from everyone. And there's Prospero with his books and his intellect. And then there's this character, Ariel, who in the play, I guess, is male, but you can't quite tell.
Yeah, very androgynous.
Very androgynous. A strange creature, actually. Wonderful creature with these properties of, again, magic, the ability to do things that are unearthly. And Kip and Bryce share this daughter. And at the end of the novel, Ariel's a character that fascinated me throughout the book. At the end of the novel, she's come of age. She's in her early 20s, and she's about to discover who her real father is. And she's given a key and an envelope. And as a novelist, I find that completely irresistible. So I've begun to work on Ariel's story. That'll be my next project.
And I understand this is going to be part of a trinity or a trilogy.
I think that too is irresistible. But what I really want to make here are 3 books that don't rely one on the other, that are totally independent one of the other, and that form a kind of loose trilogy, not sequels as such, but where they interplay, and you can read them in any order, and you'll be happy if you only read one. You won't be happy if you read none of them, but you can also just read one, or all 3. That's the idea. Electron, proton, neutron, circling around each other and forming an energy
Brad,
field.
thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for
Bradford
having me.
Morrow is the author of Trinity Fields, just published by Viking. I'm Steve Benson. Thanks for joining us.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.